At Dragonstone, Daenerys stood at the window of the war room and looked north and thought about what she had agreed to. She had agreed to let him go. She had agreed because Tyrion said it was necessary and Varys said it was prudent, and every reasonable argument pointed toward waiting at Dragonstone while Jon Snow and a small group of men walked into the lands of the dead. She had agreed to all of it and she had been wrong to agree. She turned from the window. Tyrion was behind her along with Varys, who was watching her with the careful patience of a man who has learned to read the shape of decisions before they are made. "I'm going," she said. Tyrion's expression did not change in the way of someone who has not been surprised, but who was hopping not to be having this conversation. "Your Grace." "He went north with a handful of men and a hammer," she said. "A handful of men, a hammer, and ghost against whatever is up there. We sent him." "It was his mission," Tyrion said. "His choice. He knew the risks." "He's not going to die so that we can have a white to show Cersei Lannister," Daenerys said. "I have 3 dragons. He needs them. I should have gone from the beginning and I didn't, and I'm correcting that now." Varys spoke, which was unusual. Varys usually allowed Tyrion to do the persuading. "If you go north and something happens to you, everything we have built here ends. You are the reason these armies are here. You are the reason this alliance exists. You are." "Yes," she said. "I know what I am. I also know what's north of that wall, and I know that a handful of men with dragonglass are not sufficient to face it." She looked at both of them. "Keep Dragonstone. Send ravens if anything changes. I'll be back." She was gone before either of them had finished forming the next objection. Tyrion looked at Varys. Varys looked at the window through which she had already, in spirit, departed. "Well," Tyrion said after a moment, "at least she's consistent." The fight on the frozen lake had the quality of a nightmare that kept getting worse. They had found their white. They had captured it, one isolated corpse, separated from a small white walker patrol, Jon cutting down the walker while the others seized one of the whites that didn't collapse when the walker fell. They had the proof they needed. They had turned south, when suddenly, a low, thunderous rumble rose from all directions, and with it came the dead. Not dozens, hundreds, then thousands. The horizon to the north went dark with them, a moving darkness, a tide of shapes emerging from the white in silence, and the silence was worse than any battle cry because it meant they did not need to frighten you. Fear was a tool of creatures that could be stopped. The dead were patient. They came across the open snow and the ice in a wave so wide it had no flanks to find, and the 13 of them ran for the frozen lake. The ice held them back, briefly. The whites at the front pushed onto the lake and the ice cracked and gave and they went under, and the ones behind kept coming and went under in turn, and the lake swallowed dozens of the dead before the pressure from behind slowed, and the survivors scrambled to the small island of rock at the lake's center. It was barely 10 yards across. They stood on it and looked at the army assembled around them on the shore, and understood the arithmetic of the situation without needing to discuss it. The Night King stood on the far shore. He was watching as he always watched, with the infinite patience of something that has all the time there is and does not find waiting uncomfortable. His white walkers flanked him, 6 of them, pale and still as ice sculptures, their blue eyes tracking the rock and the men on it. He had not come closer. He did not need to. The lake was freezing around them. Not the slow freeze of winter, but the targeted work of something directing cold with intention, the ice thickening at the lake's edges as the dead waited for a floor to walk on. Gendry had run. Jon had sent him back before the dead fully closed, sent him south with the speed of a young man who had been built for exactly one thing in this situation, and that thing was running. "Get to Eastwatch," Jon had said. "Send a raven to Dragonstone, go." The hound grabbed Gendry's hammer as he passed. "You won't be needing this," he muttered, "unless you plan on outrunning the dead by hitting them one at a time." Gendry shot him a look but didn't slow. He had gone without arguing, which Jon had not expected but was grateful for. There were 12 of them stranded on the rock, armed with Valyrian steel and dragonglass. Jon, Jorah, Beric, Tharos, the Hound, Tormund, and 6 wildling rangers who had stepped forward at Eastwatch. They were hard men, seasoned by a lifetime beyond the wall, and they understood all too well what waited on the far shore. Ghost moved among them, immense and blood-stained from small, superficial injuries, his pale form a shifting shadow in the dark. They fought the whites that came across the ice in the first testing waves. Jon drove Longclaw through the chest of the first one to reach him, and felt the Valyrian steel do what it did. The thing shattered. He took the next in the neck and it shattered too, and beside him Ghost tore into a third with his enormous jaws and ripped it apart so completely that the pieces couldn't reassemble. Beric called the fire into his sword, the Lord of Light's gift, orange in the dark, and it lit the chaos in blazing arcs, the dead burning where it touched. Tormund fought with the cheerful ferocity of a man who has found the exact situation he was built for. The Hound killed things methodically with his new hammer, with the expression of someone doing a job he does not enjoy but is very good at. 4 of the wildlings died in the first hours. They died well, covering gaps, buying seconds for others, doing what the free folk had always done in the north. Tormund knew their names. The rock got quieter. The dead kept coming. Thoros pulled Beric clear of the ice edge as the third wave hit. Beric had slipped, and a white had caught his sleeve, dragging him toward the water, and Thoros moved without thinking and hauled him back with both hands. A blow caught Thoros across the ribs that left him breathing in short, careful increments for the rest of the night. He kept fighting anyway. He had outlived too many desperate nights to stop now. Jorah held the far side of the rock with Mormont composure, the face of a man who has run out of things to be afraid of. The ice kept thickening. The waves kept coming. Jon was bleeding from two places he hadn't noticed getting cut, and the cold in the wounds was deeper than blood cold, and he understood with the clarity of physical fact that they were not going to survive this. Then Daenerys arrived. She came out of the south with all three dragons. And the scale of what she brought changed everything absolutely. 3 enormous bodies crossing the gray sky, 3 streams of fire reducing the advancing dead to ash in wide swathes across the ice. The survivors scrambled back on the rocks. The dragons circled. Drogon came in low, a black wall of fire sweeping the near shore clean, the sound of him so vast it was felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears. Viserion and Rhaegar worked the flanks, the pale gold and the green weaving between the advancing masses, fire finding the concentrations the dead had built. The ice steamed where the fire touched it. The dead burned and fell and lay still. Jon stood on the rock with blood on his hands and looked at the fire in the sky and felt something give way in him that had been braced for impact. He looked at Daenerys on Drogon's back above the lake and thought, she came. He had not been certain she would. He was certain now. The dragons circled, the dead stopped advancing, and then the Night King raised his hand. He was standing on the far shore of the lake, surrounded by his white walkers, watching. He had always been watching, that was the thing about him, the thing that was most frightening even before you accounted for the army. He watched with the patience of something that had been doing this for 8,000 years and had no reason to hurry. He lifted a spear of ice, formed from the cold itself, from the deep winter magic that was his purpose and his inheritance. The Night King closed his eyes. It was the only time Jon had ever seen him do something that resembled ritual, that had the quality of preparation rather than mere action. His lips moved. No sound carried across the water, but the cold intensified in the way it intensified when he worked his deeper magic, a directional chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The spear of ice in his hand brightened, not with warmth but with something older, the pale blue of absolute winter made visible. Then he opened his eyes. He looked at Viserion. He threw. Jon watched from the rocks and there was nothing he could do. The manifested spear crossed the distance in a fraction of a second, a white streak against the dark sky, and it found Viserion perfectly. The sound it made was something Jon would never be able to describe to anyone who hadn't heard it, the sound of a dragon being unmade. Viserion fell from the sky. He fell the way large things fell, slowly, it seemed, because the scale of it required adjustment, the mind insisting that something this enormous could not actually be ending this quickly. He fell and he struck the ice, and the ice broke beneath him and he went under, and the water closed over him, and the silence after was the deepest Jon had ever heard. Daenerys did not land. The ice was broken and uncertain, and Drogon was the last thing standing between the survivors and the army still assembled on the far shore, and she stayed aloft, circling low, low enough that Jon could see her face from the rocks. He had never seen her face do anything quite like what it did in that moment, not breaking, not collapsing, but going somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond the reach of what was currently happening. She looked at the place where Viserion had gone under, and she kept Drogon between the survivors and the army, and she did not look away. "Your Grace," Jon called up to her. She looked down at him from Drogon's back. Those violet eyes were dry. "We leave," she said, her voice carrying across the ice. "We take your white and we go south and we come back with everything we have." They retreated.